Like those that we love, we are never satisfied to not continue learning, to not continue growing with, to not continue growing closer, Father. And I thank you for your faithful, steadfast love to us, that you never stop, that you never stop drawing close to us. You don't miss a moment to be close to us. You don't miss a second, Father. And if it takes a second, or if it takes years, if it takes thousands of years, you will move yourself closer to us, Father. May we have that same love towards you, Father. We thank you tonight for that love, Father. We thank you for your word, Father, that has been preserved for us, that has told us of your love for us, Father. Tonight, Father, we seek after you. We seek after every bit of you that we can fit into our minds, Father. May you open our minds. May you guide our hearts and our minds and give us wisdom and grant us understanding of you, Father. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. You can all be seated. Oh, thank you all for being here. This is cool. I feel like normally there's more people on this side on Encounter Night. Am I crazy? I don't know. It's not a problem. I just like, wow, oh, that's cool. Welcome to Encounter Night, everyone. Welcome to Bible study hosted Encounter Night. I am excited for tonight. I'm always kind of nervous, but also mostly excited, just ready to start talking about the Word. If you were with us last time, you know that we're in a series we're calling By a Question, and the question is, who is God? It's potentially the most important question we can ask Scripture, and it's potentially one of the answers to which the Scripture is most concerned with. Next to that maybe is, who are you? But to understand that, you have to understand who is God. And we are currently committed to walking through sections of Genesis. Genesis is the beginning of the Bible. It's the introduction to the Bible. It also serves as the introduction to God. And so our heart has been to step through key passages in Genesis and really dig into what they reveal about God. And last time was our first study in that series, and we began in the beginning with Genesis 1. And we will still be in Genesis 1 and a little Genesis 2 today. We will be probably today closing out what I call the cosmic creation narrative. Genesis 1 and then the beginning of 2 sort of cover this account of the creation of the cosmos, if you will. But it does get a little bit more personal than that. And then it gets very personal in the subsequent chapters, and we'll be digging into those too. And I'm really looking forward to that. So as a quick recap, we didn't actually get that far into Genesis 1 because there's a lot to unpack just in those first few verses. We learned from verse 1 that God is the creator, that makes him the uncaused cause, and he's from which all things come. We also learned that in Hebrew, the word that gets translated God, Elohim, is a plural word, but gets paired with singular verbs. So we know the word refers to a singular thing, but there's a honorific plural being used to express the majesty of that which is being talked about, or the sort of transcendent majesty of that thing, similar sort of to how we'll say the waters or the skies or the heavens. In verse 2, we learned that he's that from which all potential flows. His mere presence of his Spirit over the waters transforms the very context of what's being said. That it transforms the waters from just some chaos to something which could give birth to something, to life and to goodness. And we read the first day, and we learned on the first day that God is a mind that has thoughts and intentions, that he speaks creation into existence with a careful intentionality. He deems things good and thus is good, and he names things, which is to give them purpose and to give them identity. And that's sort of where we left off. We had finished the first day, which we'll end up reading again, and we're going to move a little faster through this just because when it comes to the rest of the days, there'll be things to unpack on each day a little bit, and we'll talk about them. But then once we've read through them, we're going to look back on them holistically and sort of talk about what they reveal altogether. So we'll just start back on the first day. So this will be Genesis verse 1, verse 3. And it says, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and morning one day. And you'll notice a recurring sort of pattern in here. Verse 6, God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse. He separated the waters that were below the expanse from the waters that were above, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Your translations may say the sky or something like that instead of heaven. Now, already an interesting thing here is there's a bit, if we were expecting a perfect format, it's already been broken a little bit. For one, while he does speak his intention into existence, it's followed by him then doing it, as opposed to the light, which just manifests that in his voice. There's an action that he takes here. It's also interesting that we don't get a specific phrase that says, then he saw heaven and he saw that it was good. Now, spoiler alert, at the end of this, it will say he looks on all of the things that he made and he sees that it was good. So we're not to believe that the sky wasn't good. But it is an interesting, and we'll talk about this more, I'm pointing this out for a reason, that there isn't actually a perfect format going on here as we would think of it, a consistent format. Verse 9, then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place and let dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, so this is also an interesting break in format, that seemed like, we would expect the end of a day there, but so he's going to do something else on this day. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit according to their kind, with seed in them." And it was so. The earth produced the vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. So another interesting thing here. In this case, he's almost giving a command to the earth. The earth ends up producing the vegetation because God commanded it to do so. So already, now that there starts to be things which could follow his commands, they are following his commands. And in a way, he's almost working with them to produce creation. Verse 14, then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and they shall serve as signs and for seasons and for days and years. And they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the heavens to give life on the earth." And it was so. Verse 16, God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. Now you might find this interesting terminology. Why doesn't it just say he made the sun and the moon? We know that's what he's talking about. Well, the dilemma is that the names for the sun and the moon, which you'll notice he doesn't give names to these things, in ancient Near East culture, these things were gods. The sun was a god or the image of one. The moon, likewise, even the stars and the constellations, they were images of gods. And so this narrative is actually very careful to not name them, lest you confuse them with being deities. This does not want to leave any room sort of for a misinterpretation of what's going on, especially in a world and a culture which was used to everything was and had a god. So it's very careful to actually not name these things because it wants to treat them as pieces of creation, not deities in and of themselves. The fourth day. Verse 20, God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." So this is the first living creatures we get. We're in the fifth day. And it's just for terminology, I'm going to call the birds and the fish. It does say, right, just swimming creatures. This would include things that today we would not classify as fish. We don't call whales fish, for example. But for the Hebrews, if it lived in the water, it was a fish. It's just a different classification system. It's a lot simpler, too, than what we have. God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves. That great sea creatures actually there is it's like almost, you could translate it sea monsters even. There's something that would be to us scary about them, but it's treated so normal here. With which the waters swarmed according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. So we've heard this, according to its kind now. This is the second time we heard it about the plants as well. Remember that. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them. So here's a new thing that's happening again. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Something sort of interesting is you guys may be familiar with the concept of numbers being significant in Hebrew and in the Bible. This God blessed them saying is the seventh time God says something in this narrative. And it's a blessing. Verse 24, "Then God said, let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock and crawling things and animals of the earth according to their kind. And it was so. God made the animals of the earth according to their kind, and the livestock according to their kind, and everything that crawls on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." And then, verse 26, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth." So there's a lot that just happened there. What many of you have noticed before reading Genesis or heard, that it is kind of peculiar. Why does he say let us? Who is he talking to? And you might say that it's related to what I said about Elohim, right? That's a plural word. It's just honorific. But this is different in the sense of now this is God saying something. And the verbs here, make, that's a plural verb. The subject is implied to be plural here. So what's going on? We're going to stop and we're going to talk about this for a bit because it's actually really interesting. But before we talk too deeply about it, are there questions about, I know we haven't hit a lot of points, but just I want to make sure we're good? All right. If you ever have a question, you can raise your hand too. You don't have to wait for me to ask. So who is we, right? Who's us here? There's a similar thing that happens actually in two other places. If you could put the next slide up. In Genesis 3, the Lord God says, This the concept. So the concept there, just to put a point on that, is that God is conferring with or deliberating with a heavenly council of divine beings, like what we would call angels. We see this happen actually in other parts of the Bible. So, namely in the beginning of the book of Job, we get this concept. It's not an unheard of concept that there's a council of angels that God deliberates with at times. There's sort of two problems with interpreting this that way, though, in Genesis. One, there isn't a mention of the heavenly council in creation, so it would seem to come out of nowhere. The other issue is that it would imply that the angels are also made in the image of God, which is not stated anywhere else in Scriptures. In the rest of Scriptures, it is treated as though man is the only ones created in the image of God. An interesting theory that I don't agree with, but I found it really intriguing, so I wanted to share it, was that God's talking to the earth. In Genesis 2, we'll learn that he brought man out of the earth. So the idea is, he's collaborating with the earth to create mankind, and that's who the us is. He's talking to the earth. It has sort of the same, as intriguing as it is, it has sort of the same problems as the angels, is that the earth was not created in the image of God. And as it says here, he says, let us make mankind in our image. What's also interesting is that immediately following this, it will describe him doing it, but it'll be singular again. Only one thing acts to create man. The last interpretation that I found is what's called a royal we. It's this concept that a royal we, or a royal us. We. No, not weeds, no. It's a hard word to enunciate, especially without context here. So it's attested in at least later cultures, this idea of kings and emperors will say things like us. I mean, famously, Queen Elizabeth did this. But that's obviously much later culture than we're talking about in Genesis. But even earlier cultures, this practice is attested. While the major thing is we don't know that this was a thing in Hebrew culture, but we know that it was a thing in some cultures of the area, at least later. And so the interpretation then goes that what's happening here is that God is referring to himself as an us in this tradition of a way of royal speaking. Now that would be like, well, why is God speaking like just some like earthly kings? Well, this would be a way of communicating a concept to the audience. Right now, there's not a person that's listening to God. And so we can probably assume that what's happening is not that God is making vibrations in the air that someone's eardrum is picking up. That's not what we mean by speech here. So it's sort of translating what's going on, if you will. And when God deliberates here, it depicts him as deliberating as a king would. And so that's how that interpretation goes. And it essentially, for me, something that I think about, and this is really probably not what this is not what the original audience would have heard, but just if I can just share with you guys a little bit when I read this. I think of Bob Ross. It's because he'd always be like, let us make a little tree, and now he's sort of talking to an audience in a way. But I also think like when you're working on something, when I'm crafting something, if I'm building something, sometimes I talk to myself and I say things like that. I don't think that's how this is supposed to be interpreted, but I thought that was like a really like interesting thing. So there's those different ways of interpreting it, and I'm not going to tell you one way is right or wrong. I've presented to you the things that are potentially problems with any of them. I think personally, if you asked me, that it's sort of a combination of the royal we, which then gets elaborated later in the Trinity. Yes?
Just a statement. So when we read the very first verse,
Yeah.
you said that, I'm trying to think. You said that there was a word that
interpretation. Yeah.
With the let us make mankind in our image.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the grammatical format of us in this verse?
So it is plural. What's different? So the question is whether or not. Well, the question is when we said Elohim is plural, but it gets translated singular. Why is this not just the same thing that's going on, essentially, right? And so a reason for that would be that while us is plural and so is Elohim, make here is also plural. But so in verse 1, it says Elohim created. That created verb is singular. So we talk about this, right, was singular, right? No, the created is singular. That's why it gets translated God. That's why we know it's singular. Because because it's a singular verb. So like in Spanish, for example, and indeed in most other languages that I know of, the verbs have different forms depending on, right, if it's a singular subject or a plural subject. And Hebrew is the same. We don't have that in English, so we kind of lose that a little bit. Make here, exactly. Make here is plural, so that's why it seems to be, okay, there is a plural thing going on here. Now, in the next verse, we can actually go to the next verse, verse 27. It says, so God created man in his own image. So here, this is singular again. So once he acts, it is just one thing acting. Was there a question? Yeah. Yes. Right, yeah. Without the Trinity, there isn't a full explanation here. Yes, I think that's, thank you. Yeah, important to say that there was always a mystery to this for the ancient readers. Right. We can say, okay, the Trinity, but the Trinity itself is now our mystery, right? So yes, there's always, and this gets into what we were talking about last time too, with why do they use the plural word Elohim, but then combine it with a singular verb and mean you to understand that they're talking about one God? Well, it's because God is big and he's mysterious, and so their way of honoring that, even in how they talk about him, even in the noun they use for him, is to break their language a little bit. Because he doesn't even fit into their language, basically, is like what that says. And so yes, absolutely, there's a similar mystery going on here that gets revealed more in the Trinity, and now we have that mystery. And we can talk more about like mysteries maybe. At some point, mysteries are those things that, well, in a way that, that I love, and they're things to expect. You're dealing with an infinite God that transcends reality, really, in a way, right? Like what we know and experience as reality and as time that transcends those things. We're not going to fit him into our head. And so, again, like we talked about last time, when we're asking the question, who is God, that isn't to say that we expect to have a finite answer to that question. We just want to know as much as we can, as much as he's willing to reveal to us and that we're capable of understanding. So we're going to keep reading. It says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. In Hebrew, that's a little poem. Verse 28, God blessed them and said to them, so there's another blessing here, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. And to every animal of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. And before we get to the last day, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of man being created in God's image. A lot of us have may be already familiar with the idea that this image is a word that gets used not just in the Bible, but terminology within the ancient Near Earth culture, sometimes to refer to what we might call an idol, which was, for polytheistic cultures, this little man-made thing which represented the deity, but it wasn't just a picture of the deity. There was this very real concept that that deity, it was a conduit for that deity's presence, and it was like a workstation, if you will, for that deity that they could operate through. So they weren't, to the people that believed in them, they weren't just stone and wood. They were very much divine objects that had a divine presence about them. And so for Genesis to say that mankind is the image of God is to say something very dramatic in the cultures of the day. It is to say that God's presence flows through mankind and his work flows through mankind. And this image, it's actually similar to, so all the other living things, right, they get created according to their kind. So actually in the Hebrew, a way that you could also translate it is that, so God created man, or sorry, in the verse before it says, then God said us, let us make mankind in our image according to our likeness. There's similar words here to the kinds that are used for the other animals. So the plants, the fish, the birds, they were all made according to their kind, but when humans were made, their kind was God's kind. And then the last day, actually no, let's not get to the last day yet. Let's talk about the days we just read about. There's a chart I have for you guys, just to make this easier to talk about. So we've got all 6 days. On day 1, we get day and night, or time, essentially. Day 2, you get the sky. Day 3, you get the sea and the land. Day 4, you get the lights. Day 5, you get the birds and the fish. Day 6, you get animals and man. Now, I've staggered them this way for a reason. So I told you that there was a reason why I was talking about how there's a pattern, but that pattern isn't as consistent as we might like. It's not as organized as we might like. So what's going on here, the reason I've staggered this, is that these days, these last 3 days, they harken back to the first 3. So he creates day and night, he creates time, and the lights are set in the sky to keep time. So he created light, and he created time, and then on day 4, he creates the lights, and he delegates that job to them. So he's delegated the production of light and the keeping of time to these lights. But the lights inhabit the sky. So they sort of bridge day 1 and 2, and that's why I put it here. Then we get the creation of the birds and the fish. Well, the birds fly up near the sky, and then the fish are down in the sea. So they bridge day 2 and 3. And then day 6, you get the animals, which cover the land, and you get the man who inhabits the land but rules all of this other stuff in the name of God. Thank you, honey. As the image of God. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why man is bridging sort of between day 6, day 3, and then day 7. So what I actually was struggling for a while because I had this impression of Genesis 1 that, like, I knew that there were patterns in it, but when I realized that certain patterns weren't, like, consistent. He doesn't name everything. He only names certain things. He doesn't even have a moment where he says everything is good. He has it at the end where he retroactively says everything was good, but he doesn't stop to say that the heaven was good. Mankind itself doesn't even get a specific statement, but it is included in the everything that was very good. You could say that day 1 through 3 are about environment, and then day 4 through 6 are about population, but the plants themselves that are on the land that are created on day 3 kind of like make this like weird like are the plants environmental, or are the plants life? Like, how does it think of it? And it talks about life in a certain pattern. It talks about environmental things in a different pattern. And it talks about the plants in both ways. And it talks about the lights even, a little bit like they're almost animals in the sky. So there's these things that feel almost, to my mind, unorganized. And for me, one of the things I realized was this is talking about a real thing. This is talking about, like, we can talk all day, and I love it. It's not the point of this particular Bible study to talk about the many interpretations of how you can interpret what's going on, but we all agree that it's talking about a real thing. It's talking about something real that happened. It's trying to communicate to you something real that happened. And so I was trying to, like, fit it into the box of, like, a well-organized story, but it's giving you a sequence of events that at the very least represent real things if they aren't literally real things. Like I said, I'm not here to get into that. And the thing is that real things, they don't always fall into the categories we want them to fall into. They don't always match up with how we think things should work. And again, just like Pastor Michael was getting at, his ways are not our ways. And so there's some things where I'm like digging into it. I'm like, what does this mean? Why is it like this? And sometimes I have to be satisfied that it's like that because that's the way that it is. But I don't mean that to shut down curiosity. I think it's always good to study, to seek after, to say there's a reason it's like this, and to explore those mysteries. But I've had to learn that I can get lost in the mystery when I forget that that's what I got into. Like I should have known I was getting into a mystery. And it's important to remember to come back to your sort of anchors, the things you do know to be true. So that's just my little encouragement for you guys in that sense, because when you're studying the Bible, there's things that are going to be confusing. And this isn't to say things always have to be confusing, but some things will be. It's God. And it's love, His love and His mercy, and the fact that we are created in His likeness, that we understand anything about Him at all. And it's a blessing to us that we have our reason, that we have our logic, or we have the intelligence which are given to us by God, and that He does ask us to explore Him, to explore His Word, but we also must be patient with it in ourselves. That mystery could not be answered fully, and still can't be answered fully, that we talked about before, until Revelations, which came later, and that took time. Now, the last day, Genesis 2. So this creation narrative doesn't end in chapter 1, it actually ends in chapter 2. The heavens and the earth were completed, and all of their heavenly lights. So they were completed by the sixth day. By the seventh day, God completed His work. Well, they should completed on the sixth day. By the seventh day, God completed His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done. Then God blessed the seventh day, sanctified it, because on it He rested from all His work which God had created and made. And so, if you will, ends the cosmic creation narrative. Now, Genesis isn't done talking to us, but we're not going to get into the rest of Genesis 2 right now. But we are going to get into something else, and I don't know how often something like this would be read in churches. Not that there would be a reason to do it very much. But I have appreciated Genesis as a whole, and certainly Genesis 1, in contrast to what the cultures around it were saying instead. So the Hebrews did not live, the ancient Israelites did not live in a world that didn't have any other cultures in it. They lived in the Near East, right? Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, well, modern day, right? Back then, you've got Babylon and Assyria, you've got the Egyptians, I mean, that's still called Egypt, but the Egyptians, later you'll get the Greeks come down, and it's been considered the birthplace of civilization, with the Sumerians believed to be like one of the earliest civilizations, or empires maybe I should say, that gathered up and started conquering lands and building big walls and fighting big wars. And they had their own idea about where everything came from. And what we shouldn't be surprised to find is that sometimes there's similar words and terms that are used in some of their, what you might call, creation epics. So I want to talk a little bit today about the Babylonians' creation myth. It's a myth known as the Enuma Elish, and it was discovered fairly recently as far as history is concerned on 7 clay tablets in ancient Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq. And the Babylonians essentially descended from those Sumerians. This narrative was only partially preserved on 7 clay tablets. We actually don't, which is incomplete, especially tablet 5. And it's pretty long, it's about 1,000 lines. And people have, since its discovery and its translation, people have noticed what seem like similarities between Genesis and the Enuma Elish. What we're going to talk about today is the differences. So I'm going to we're going to read some excerpts from it, and I'm going to give mostly a summary. And I'm doing this for a reason. Because the Hebrews were not unaware of the Babylonians. In fact, if you read Genesis, you'll find out they all came from the Tower of Babel, which is the Tower of Babylon. In fact, the Enuma Elish mentions the Tower of Babylon. Of course, they have a different version of the story. But these cultures are contemporaries of one another. And what they're saying about their origins isn't just, hey, here's what we think happened. It's also, here's who we say we are and who we say you are. And that's why we do what we do. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later. If we just and to talk a little bit about the similarities, if we put up, this is the first few lines from the first tablet of the Enuma Elish. It says, when the heavens above did not exist and the earth beneath had not come into being, there was Apsu, the first in order, their begetter, and Demiurge, Tiamat, who gave birth to them all. They had mingled their waters together before meadowland had coalesced and reed bed was to be found, when not one of the gods had been formed or had come into being, when no destinies had been decreed, the gods were created within them. So you've got a similar way of stating a primordial state, like a similar way of describing, okay, there's water, there's desolate emptiness, an intuitive way of describing nothingness, or like a pre-creation state. And you've got 2 waters. In this case, though, they're gods. So it's already a really big difference from Genesis. But there's 2 waters. You got Tiamat and you got Apsu. Great. So from this point on, if you want this to be a creation narrative, it immediately loses the plot. Out of Apsu and Tiamat, a bunch of younger gods just are produced. It doesn't seem to be intentional from either of them. It just happens. They manifest. There's now younger gods. Those gods begin to marry each other and have more gods. And as far as Apsu is concerned, this is a mess. And everyone's making too much noise, so he wants to kill all of them. Yeah, just fair warning, this is absolutely full of conflict and violence in this narrative. Just fair warning. So Apsu conspires to kill all of the younger gods, but a younger god called Ea says no and defeats him, and then him and his wife, Damkina, move into his body and have the god Marduk in his dead heart. Then Tiamat is mad because her husband basically got killed, and so she makes a bunch of monsters to wage war on the younger gods, and the younger gods are like, oh no, what are we going to do? And they're like, we need someone to fight with Tiamat, and they're like, well, what about Marduk? And Marduk's like, I can beat her, but you have to make me king over all of y'all, which they eventually agree to after they get drunk on something. I don't know what they're getting drunk on. There's not even the sky has been created yet. Anyway, so then Marduk fights Tiamat. He kills her, and he also imprisons a god. Sorry, I'm trying to find the name. Named Kingu. That's important. Kingu was working with Tiamat. I promise this is like this gets interesting because there's a really important thing going on here. But so Marduk defeats Tiamat, and you may have even heard of Marduk in other Bible studies and things. A big important god for Babylon. Lures Tiamat into single combat, defeats her, imprisons the monsters and Kingu. Marduk splits Tiamat's body into 2 pieces. So I said there were 7 tablets. We're in tablet 4 now already. So there's a lot of just them fighting with one another. So Marduk splits Tiamat's body into 2 pieces and uses one half to create the sky and one half to create the seas and the land, essentially. I'm not going to go into detail because, honestly, there's some gritty detail about what he does with certain parts. But I do want to convey to you that this is a violent narrative. All of creation comes out of a violent conflict. It's absolutely a very violent narrative. And there's a war, and then he creates the skies and lands with these body parts of essentially his grandmother. And so you can see how people would be like, oh, well, Tiamat represented the waters, and they split the waters into the waters above and the waters below. It's yeah, but very different from Genesis, right? We're talking about complete tonal difference. Marduk then decides that he wants to make humans, so he talks to another god about it, and that god says, well, we can make humans with the blood of a god, so let's kill one of the other gods. And they kill Kingu, who they had imprisoned. And they make humans out of his blood. Right? Then, after he's done, and the reason that he wants to make humans is because at the time, all of the gods are essentially managing creation, and they're kind of tired of it. So he makes humans to be slaves to the gods, to take on their work, so that they can rest. And so he does that. He creates the humans as slaves to the gods, and then all the gods are very happy with Marduk for everything that he's done for them. And then they say, what can we do for you? And he says, build Babylon. So this is Babylon's origin story, according to them. And they build a tower, and there's this emphasis on the bricks, just like there is in Genesis 11. And they build a tower that's a temple to Marduk. And then they essentially say a bunch of names through a whole tablet of Marduk. They're just singing his praise, essentially, and that's how it ends. So you can definitely pull out a few keywords. You'd be like, okay, there's waters, and there's the sky, and there's the land, and someone mentions rest at some point, but it's all tonally extremely different, right? The Babylonian creation myth is not unlike others of the area. I can't really read to you or give you a summary of what the Egyptians believe their origins were, because it changed depending on which city you were in and which dynasty you were in. That story changed quite a bit. But some versions of the stories, a god accidentally creates humanity from his tears. And so in all of these, mankind is either an accident from the gods or is made to be their slaves. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're made to be slaves to the gods, did you know what the Babylonian king called himself? A god. He was Marduk's dude. He's like, I'm besties with Marduk, which means you're slaves to me. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about what it means, right? In Genesis, creation is not the result of conflict or violence. It doesn't end with a world that's being held together by the gods and their human slaves. When I'm reading the Enuma Elish, which I don't recommend because it's really dense, honestly, and there's parts of it that are missing, so it's kind of hard to do so. But it is interesting, so I guess if you're interested in it, absolutely. But when I'm reading that, or I'm reading Egyptian, or there's this chaos to the creation itself. There's this violence to it. There's this idea that the violent world that we're used to, that everyone in the Middle East at the time, everyone in the world at the time was used to a violent, chaotic world. They're saying that's just the way it is. It's the way it's always been. But not in Genesis. Genesis says it's not supposed to be this way, and it wasn't created this way. And God isn't a conqueror of the chaos. He isn't the warrior king. He doesn't create humans by accident. He doesn't create anything by accident. He speaks every single thing into existence with intentionality and with order. He sets things for certain days. He sets things with certain jobs. And there's an intentionality to all of it that you don't feel in any of the other creation myths. That there's a plan. And really the characterization, is the reason I bring all this up, that pops for me reading Genesis after reading these other things, is that God is not characterized as a warrior king, as a violent conqueror of the chaos. He's depicted as a craftsman. He's just building something good. And at the end of it, you learn that he's sort of building himself a house. And he moves into it on day 7. He rests in it. Not because he's tired of the work, not because he needed the humans to do his work for him. In fact, he just wanted to do work with them. He wanted to share creation. He wanted to rule it, but with them. Not as slaves, but as partners. And that says something different about you. And that's why it's important. It doesn't, outside of what it means, it doesn't matter that much how the mechanism by which things came about. The mechanism is only important because it means something. Because it tells you something about God, it tells you something about you. For the Babylonians, you're nothing but the pieces of a rebel god destined to be slaves to the king. And if you don't do it right, then this sort of chaotic creation will become more chaotic, and then the storms are going to come, and the floods are going to come, it's going to be a mess, so you better do your thing, stay in your lane, do what you're supposed to do. So in the cultures that it existed in, Genesis is already a truth that sets free if you accept it. It's already a truth that says you're not a slave. You're not an accident. None of it is an accident. And so at the end of it, you learn this depiction of God as a craftsman, it feels like. As he goes to work. He goes to work on day 1 and he completes a part of his work. He goes to work on day 2. He completes another part of his work. He goes to work on day 3, right? There's order, there's intentionality, and there's care for every bit of it. So, can we put we'll put our summary chart up here of the things that we learn about God in Genesis 1. So, he's the creator, uncaused cause, beginning, alpha, big, really important stuff. Every single bit of this is important. majestic, defying classification or finite definition, transformative potential. He's a mind that has thoughts and intentions. He's the source of good. He's a bringer of order. He's the giver of purpose. And he's a craftsman, and he cares about what he makes. And in all of that, what do you learn about you? You learn that you're the image of that God. So you're meant to create. You're meant to bring potential, to be a partner in that bringer of potential. You're meant to have thoughts and intentions. You're meant to bring about good. You're meant to help bring order and to give purpose. It's really poignant today as well. Not to get too preachy on you guys. But I'm always happy to have a conversation about the really interesting scientific stuff and theories. But we can't forget that we're talking about, yes. Yeah, that's, please.
On the tablets, when is it believed that these tablets, or the age of the tablets?
So So David asked, what is the age of the tablets that have the Aluma Elish on it? So the tablets, I'm not going to be able to give you like a date right off the top of my head, but I can probably get one for you. So they're older than the surviving manuscripts that we have of the Torah. Yes. That doesn't make them older than the information that's in the Torah, because the Torah is written on our modern day version of paper, because the Hebrews were not a empire that was writing things on stone tablets, with the exception of the 10 Commandments, which God gave to Moses. Right? And I mentioned this last time. I always love to mention this. So there's different examples of this, but for me, one of the biggest ones is in Genesis 2, which we're going to get into next time. We get the story where God makes man out of the ground. What's really interesting is that in Hebrew, as you guys may know, the Hebrew word for mankind is Adam, or Adam, right? It's where his name comes from, Adam. The word for ground is Adamah. The word for mankind is taken out of the word for ground, just as man is taken out of the ground. So what's really interesting about that and other examples, this narrative has clearly influenced the language itself, which means that the narrative has to predate the language. We have, our oldest version is written in this language, but clearly this narrative had to come from before. The Babylonians don't say the man came out of the ground. The Egyptians don't say that. The Bible says that, right? Genesis says that. So why do they have this built into their language? Because they had a concept of this before the language reached its form that we have it. So I would say that there's all the evidence to suggest that while the tablets themselves are older than the surviving manuscripts, that's to be expected because the manuscripts are papyrus, not stone. We can't say which narrative came first. I don't know that God didn't give the narrative to the Hebrews in whatever form that was before the Babylonians had their concept, or if he gave it after to clear the story up. Neither really bothers me, right? So, but it's a really good question. And also related to that question, it corresponds to a certain part in Babylon's history, which corresponds to the rise in the popularity of Marduk as them lifting him up as this is our God, this is our chief deity. And that happens when Nebuchadnezzar the First, which is not the Nebuchadnezzar from the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar the First is much older. Nebuchadnezzar the First defeats a smaller kingdom, as Babylon does, and that kingdom had a idol or statue of Marduk, and they take that back to Babylon, and they make that their main thing. And again, Nebuchadnezzar I would have been being like, I'm Marduk's right-hand guy. So the appearance of these tablets at that time period isn't coincidental either. There's an agenda to it, right? In fact, when I even looked up to make sure that I was right about this, I was like looking up whether or not the Babylonian kings like said that they were gods, similar to how we know that pharaohs did. What I found was that it's commonly, like, archaeologists believe that unlike the pharaohs who both said and believed that they were divine, that they were gods, that the Babylonian kings, it was just a political ploy. Like, archaeologists just think that that was probably the case, that they didn't even necessarily think that. Obviously, archaeological opinions vary, but I thought it was interesting, to say the least. So yeah, thank you for that question. Are there any other questions? Because we're going to probably wrap up here soon. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the Tower of... Oh, the tablets? Yes. So we're planning to talk about the Tower of Babel narrative later in this series. And that's not so we're not going to talk about it. That was just so you know that we're going to talk more about it. But that's in Genesis 11. It's actually a fairly short narrative. We mentioned it before. It's where we get another use of God saying, let us. He says, let us go down and confuse their languages. So yes, towards the end, sort of the closure of the Enuma Elish is that all of these gods and sub-gods and demigods are really happy with Marduk. And so Marduk's like, build me Babylon. This is Babylon's origin story, right? And so they're saying, and that in the Enuma Elish, that constitutes building a temple to him, which is described as a tower, right? And what is really interesting is it actually, for me, cleared up something that always confused me in Genesis 11, which has different importance to it. But one of the things is that, like I said, it's sort of a short narrative in Genesis 11, just the beginning of it. And it spends, relative to the rest of the narrative, a fair amount of time telling you about the bricks that are used to construct the tower. Well, the bricks are an important part of the Enuma Elish. The gods spend a year gathering them, and then another year using them to build the tower. So for me, I was like, oh, so like really Genesis is like trying to connect itself to this narrative. But because if you guys remember the Tower of Babel, that's once the languages get confused, all of the human people groups leave from there, including what we would call maybe the ancient Hebrews. Abraham comes out of the group of people. There's a whole genealogy, and then you get Abraham. So according to Genesis, everyone came from Babylon in a way. So they're saying we were there, but this is actually how it went down. And it wasn't, and they characterize it not as a tower to Marduk, but as an act of rebellion by humanity. So that's just another important difference, but it's one that's there's a piece of it that's shared. They both agree that there was a tower that was built, and in a way they kind of agree on why, right? But they characterize and it's totally very different. And again, it's because if you read Genesis, it says, yeah, we're related to Babylon. We all came from that tower. Those people over there came from that tower, right? Abraham came from that tower. Well, obviously not directly, descended from the people that came from the tower. So yeah, there's all these things that are like certain things that you would expect to be similar if they were talking about things that actually happened. Yes?
Just to bring the heart of the question,
Yeah.
since you have brought up the Enuma Elish, to be careful because this is an actual historical document that people will actually try to utilize to debunk Christianity's historical credibility. Many people use this to debate that the book and the narrative, the Torah
Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? So what David is pointing out is that things like the Enuma Elish and the things that I'm talking about today have sometimes been has been weaponized against the Bible and thus against our faith. I remember actually being somewhat, at first surprised, and then realized I shouldn't have been surprised, because at the end of the day, when any of us are serving our own agendas, we'll wield anything we can against anything else, even if it doesn't on the surface seem logical. So for me, I was not surprised to find ancient cosmological creation myths that had similar aspects to Genesis. I was not surprised. I might have been more surprised and more bothered if that wasn't the case. And so for someone that might say something like, oh, well, there's similar things between these stories. And thus, because of that, Genesis is not reliable. For me, it's a little bit like if you acknowledge that there's I don't even know this to be the case, but I'm assuming just because of proximity that there's some relationship between the Hebrew language and the Babylonian language. Why should that surprise us? Why should that bother us? It'd be like, oh, well, the Bible was written in Hebrew and the Hebrew is related to Babylonian, so it's all from the Babylonians and it's all not reliable. That's just not logical to me. It's not a reasonable, even if it's just, oh, there's things which are common, like we talked about at the beginning, right? That they seem to have a similar way of describing the primordial state. It's kind of like saying, well, okay, sure, but they use the same word for a tree as well. Is that a problem? Something is trying to be communicated to you. It has to communicate to you in a language you understand and with images you understand. And so, if anything, for me, it was just like, it's clear evidence that the Bible does originate in the ancient Near East, at the very least. And I guess it was never troubling to me, so it's kind of hard to speak to, because I don't always understand the attacking side of it. I'm like, I don't understand why you think this is a problem, you know. But it is an important issue, because it's, like I said, it's about meaning. So another thing that I feel like this leads into, and I know we're running out of time here. What did we sing? When minutes turn to hours? But I'll try to be quick with this one. And again, I don't want to get too preachy with you guys. But our origins matter. What we believe about our origins matter. And so what I was actually getting into before was that what our origins are, this is a conversation that's still happening in the modern day. There's still narratives being thrown about where it all came from and where you came from. And those narratives can be one of two things. They can be honest curiosity, right? Doing scientific studies, learning about the universe, all really cool, great stuff. But the narratives have meaning. And as much as we talk about narratives and we might talk about them in absence of that meaning, those narratives have meaning, and that's really what it's about. In the case of the Babylonians, they said, you came from the blood of a rebel god and you were created to be slaves. That means something, right? Because that means you are slaves. In other myths, you were created by accident, and so it's kind of like whatever. In a way, that's a prevailing theory today, that you were created by accident. In a way, it's not new. It's just not attached to something people would call a deity. But the question is if you came from nothing, then you are nothing. But Genesis says you came from God, you were created in his image, so you're everything, right? And that's important. And there's a author, G.K. Chesterton, I believe, was what he was known as. He was an author towards the end of the 1800s, if I remember correctly, in England. And he was writing when, Darwin's theory of evolution was like really hitting the world at that time. And he didn't really have an objection to the scientific basis of it. He had an objection to what he saw as the real, like, he said something that I think is really important for us in this discussion. And that is, he said, and I'm summarizing for him, of course, but he said, if a good thing called a man came from a good thing called an ape, and God just took his time, he's like, that's fine with me. But that's not what we're really talking about. We're talking about, is there anything worth calling a man? Is there anything worth calling an ape? Can you trust even the concepts of logic and reason? And so to say that you came from nothing becomes eventually what he called a thought that ends thought, which he called the only thought that ought to be stopped. If it's a thought that ends thought, it's kind of pointless. It's not even usable, right? And so this isn't to say, just reject, this isn't like a science versus religion thing. That's not what this is about. But this is about narratives, right? And Genesis is telling you something real that happened, but it's telling you it not just so you know what happened, it's telling you so you know who you are. And that truth of who you are and who God is, those are the truths that can't be sacrificed. And those are the truths that have proven true through the rest of the scriptures and that we've experienced with God in our lives. So those are the truths that we hold to. Yes, Ben?
No, I just think it's I know we didn't touch much on it, but Genesis 2:3, we're talking about the seventh day
Mm-hmm.
and how God separated as holy.
Yes.
I think it's very beautiful to see how God did everything in 6 days, and then even that seventh day, he separated it because he called it holy.
Mm-hmm.
He separated it, and he kind of sat with what he created.
Yeah.
And he taught everybody to sit with what you created as well too, going forward.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful thing when you see about it. Like you talk about everyone talking about creation in 7 days. I'm glad you mentioned it in 6 days because even God said, no, it was 6 days.
It was 6 days.
And this seventh day is holy because it's separate from it, where I just rest in that what I
Yeah.
created.
Yeah, you're bringing emphasis to the importance of him setting aside the seventh day as holy, as a day of rest. And what's really, again, this pops even more in light of something like the Babylonian myth. That rest wasn't just for God. He instigates the Sabbath for humanity. Later, Jesus will say that man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man. So again, unlike the Babylonians who are like, you be slaves so you do the work for us so that we can rest. God rests, but he wants everyone to rest. He says we all got to take a break. We all got to stop, and we got to enjoy what's going on and with a good creation that we made. Because he wants to work with you. You're a partner. So when he's resting, you're resting with him.
Also, like you said, also teach everybody too that what you create, you have to sit in it also. Like
Yeah.
whatever that is, and the power that man has that he gave to us too. That hey, what you then do with this power, you're gonna sit in it too.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to rest with it also.
Yeah.
Choose to use that power wisely, in that which you give it as well too. Like because at the end of the day, that's what we all are as humanity. We have this purpose entrusted into us as well too, to be good laborers of it. And what he's saying is that whatever you do labor on it, just know that you will rest in that as well too.
Mm-hmm.
At least for a time being.
Yeah, the wisdom of the Sabbath itself, right? We get wrapped up in our work, right? But God made an example, and he stopped working.
Like that Selah moment, that moment of reflection.
Yeah, yes. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your questions and your insight. It means a lot to me. Next time, I'm gonna still be with you guys because I specifically asked if I could also take Genesis 2. And my team was graciously allowed me to do that. And so I'm really excited to get into Genesis 2. Genesis 1 and the bit of 2, like I said, is very cosmic, and it tells you very important things about you and about God, which is, of course, the whole point of this series. But it's still very, like, big. It's very cosmic, right? But in chapter 2, it zooms in, and it gets very personal, and it reveals some really interesting things about God in a personal way. We've had big God things. What we're going to learn is that God's actually still very personal. And there's some really amazing, beautiful things that we learn in Genesis 2 about God and about his intentions with creation and about how he relates to creation. So I'm really looking forward to that with all of you. Please join us in 2 weeks. Join us next week as well for Encounter Night, hosted by Tribe Youth and Young. I guess that's a segue into the announcements. So yes, in a week, next Thursday, Encounter Night, hosted by Tribe Youth and Young. And then a week after that, we'll be back for Bible study. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Also, just on the note about Bible study, if you do have questions related to things we're talking about here, or really anything else about the Bible, about the scriptures, scriptures, faith, and religion, you can shoot them to our Bible study Gmail. Every once in a while, we'll do a question and response episode where our teachers take time to prepare an edifying response to these questions. And we really enjoy doing that, actually. So please send your questions. And also, you can always talk to us because we really like talking about this stuff. So yeah. Sunday service, 10 a.m. This is not the first Sunday of the month, but when we get to the first Sunday of the month, we'll have prayer at 7 a.m. Men's fellowship is tomorrow, right? Yeah. Here at the church at 7:30. If you haven't already let Pastor Michael know that you're coming, please do that just so that we have a head count. Deeply Rooted Women's Discipleship will be next Friday. There's a number there. Yeah, woo! I hear it's great. Text that number for an RSVP. You get the location. And then prayer call will be this Tuesday at 8 p.m. And you, similar to submitting questions, you can submit prayer requests to the tdpprayer@gmail.com prayer, and then join us on Tuesday night to come together in prayer. There's a lot of, the world always needs a lot of prayer. And right now, there's a lot of people mourning a lot of things in our church body. And prayer is one of the ways that God has given us to draw closer to him and to partner with him when it comes to working out his salvation and his goodness in the world. So join us for that. Is there any more? Oh yeah, ways to give. So there's the website, there's the QR code, there's the app, there's an envelope on the back. It sort of looks like this. And if you'd like to partner with us, then you can give. It's not obligatory, right? It's just what God places on your heart. Again, it's a partnership. Just like we're partnering with God, we're partnering with you. It's a partnership. It's not slavery, right? So we're not the Babylonians. Yeah, great. Thank you, honey. Well, if you all stand with me, we will pray out. Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful night. Thank you for your beautiful word. Thank you for the preservation of that word, Father. Thank you just that it has reached us, that someone has introduced it to us, that it has made it through time to reach us, that has made it through space in a way, that it's made it from where it was to where it is now, Father. I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for the gift of your word, Father. I thank you for the establishment of your church, for our brothers and sisters, for your love that's in all of us, for the fellowship, for our worship, for our giving, for our prayer, Father, for all of the ways that you have given us, that you work with us, that you partner with us, Father. I thank you for these things. I thank you for again, for just the love of the brothers and sisters who will have joy with us, who will mourn with us, Father. I ask that you bless everyone here, that you protect them on their way home, that you are with them as they meditate, that they think on, that they study on these things, as they wrestle with your word, Father. I ask that you'll be just with them, Father, and comfort them. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
Thank you all.